You're listening to Let's Talk Fantasy Football, where men of fantasy genius have realized, hey guys, we don't need real football skills to dominate on the fantasy field. Yeah. So slap on your pads and grab your helmet. Shit's about to get real.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Let's Talk Fantasy Football. I'm your host tonight. My name is Nick Walsh. And I am here for the Week 6 preview by myself. I do apologize. Supposed to be me and my good pal Rogers making this happen. Rogers had a bit of a scheduling conflict at the last minute, so I'm here. It's part 1 of the Week 6 preview. We're going to get you guys all the pertinent information that you want to know. And if we don't get you some information or whatever, like ask us questions. We're around. Ask them on Instagram, Facebook, websites, Twitter, whatever you guys want to do. We're around. You can ask them. But what I'm going to be doing for the next however long it takes me is going through about 7 games for part 1 of the Week 6 preview. I'm recording this on Thursday night during the Giants-Patriots game. It's 14-14 right now, which I did not expect. It's been a bit of a weird game, including a bomb to Golden Tate, a Brandon Bolden touchdown, a fumble recovery touchdown for the Giants, and a special teams touchdown for the Patriots. So we got all sorts of things going on. I don't understand it. I definitely didn't predict it. But I'm going to try and predict things a little bit better for these 7 games that we got. Before we get into those, though, guys, this podcast is here courtesy of MyBookie. There's nothing else like the NFL. You guys know that. And there's no better way to make the games even more exciting than to bet on them. So do the smart thing. Go to mybookie.ag because no one gives you more ways to win than they do. Use that promo code Let's Talk. That's LETSTALK. It's going to get you a 100% sign-up bonus up to $1,000. Guys, that's a great deal. Make sure you're taking advantage of it. All right, so before I jump into these games, I do want to mention that there's 4 teams on the bye this week. We are officially in the thick of bye weeks. So, there's going to be a lot more questions in terms of questionable plays, I guess, on the end of your bench that you might need to make. There's going to be a lot more trades going on because people realize they don't have the depth, or maybe they have too much depth, or whatever the case may be. But the bye weeks this week, we've got Buffalo, Oakland, Indianapolis, and Chicago. And all things considered, I don't really think that's that bad. There are a lot of teams where we're playing, not a lot of teams, but there are some teams where we're playing, upwards of 3 to 4 players on each team, on that team every single week. None of these teams really fall into that category. So I don't think this is really a killer bye week. I mean, it may have killed you individually just based on your certain team construction. But if that's the case, your team probably isn't that good to begin with. So what can you do? I think there will be much worse bye weeks than this one going forward, and we'll make sure to address them as they do. Guys, I should have said this right off the bat. Since I am recording this myself again, I am still drinking. I'm drinking White Claws tonight. They're going back to last year's style. But if you do hear any elongated pauses, it's probably because I am taking a sip of my drink, as I'm going to right now. God, I just looked up at the TV while I was taking a sip there. And it was a commercial for Bud Light Platinums. I haven't had any of those since they started doing these commercials again, but man, I used to love those things in college. Those things were 6%, so they get you super messed up super fast. Anyway, probably shouldn't drink them on the podcast because I'll get super messed up super fast, so I'll stick to what I got for right now. But guys, we're going to get into 7 games coming at you on part 1, and then part 2 will be coming at you tomorrow. I'm going to be recording it on Friday as opposed to Thursday. Split this up into 2 separate recording sessions. We'll see if I can get someone else on with me tomorrow night. It's a possibility, not really sure. But we're going to start out with the London game. And guys, unlike last week where the London game, which was Bears-Raiders, started at the same time, whether that's 10 o'clock on the West Coast or 1 o'clock on the East Coast, as a normal Sunday football game would. This is an early London game. So make sure you have your lineup set early for this one. If you have players on Carolina or Tampa Bay, which you probably do, they're 2 of those more prolific teams in terms of starting players, particularly this week. then make sure you either have this set Saturday night or you're waking up early on Sunday in order to make this happen. I'm not sure how you watch this game. I know in the past they've had like weird shit, like you have to watch it on Yahoo. I don't know if it's going to be on TV or not. Hopefully it is, because I'd like to watch it while I'm constructing, doing last minute changes for my DFS lineups on Sunday morning, as I am wont to do. But let's get right into it. Even though Tampa Bay is marked as the home team, remember it is a London game. Carolina is a 2-point favorite. The over-under here is 47.5. Now, even though it's only week 6, this is the second meeting for these two teams. Remember, they were the Thursday night game. I believe it was week 2, the week where Cam really just looked absolutely terrible. Going into that game, I was very high on Carolina to chuck the ball around the field, be a real prolific pass offense, and win that game. As it turned out, they did not win the game, but they did throw the ball a ton. I believe they threw the ball 51 times. And I don't think that's something that's really going to change in this game. The Tampa pass defense is 22nd against the pass in Football Outsiders DVOA, and they're first against the run. So when people talk about funnel defenses, which you'll hear that term thrown around a lot, Tampa Bay right now is a true funnel defense. They've just been absolutely wrecked through the air in the past couple of weeks, and it's been very difficult to get the run going against them. Now, the quarterback here is still going to be Kyle Allen, who I am picking up and starting as a streamer in a couple leagues. I think he's just a fine starter. I know Cam didn't really work out, but like I said, Cam just looked like one of the worst quarterbacks ever in that game. He was clearly not right, not 100%. So Kyle Allen is going to get the look, and I'm here to tell you to roll out all of his pass catchers. He really hasn't looked to the tight end in the past 2 weeks, only 4 M2 targets, but Olsen has been in on more than 96% of the snaps each week, so it's not like he's off the field. He saw a lot of opportunity against Tampa week 2. I think this is a great week to bring back Olsen into the conversation as a tight end starter. And I think he's a very solid starter this week ahead of, if you have people on the bye, you might have, Darren Waller or that sort of thing. Maybe you're finally giving up on OJ Howard. Olsen is a good start this week. He should be solid. And so should the rest of the Carolina pass catchers. And that's specifically Curtis Samuel and DJ Moore. That first round against Tampa Bay, they had 13 and 14 targets respectively. Both of them should have plenty of opportunity in this game to get the job done in a good matchup. So I think you can roll both of them out as solid starters. I don't think there's any reason to keep them on your bench, either of them this week. So I'm pretty much all in on this pass offense. And then obviously Christian McCaffrey is going to be a play. He really, I believe he had like 6 or 7 PPR points. I could look back, but he did not have a lot of PPR points week 2 when they did play Tampa Bay the first time. Tampa Bay has really done a great job of stonewalling the run game. So we'll see. Maybe they'll get him more involved in the pass game. Tampa Bay hasn't given up a lot in the pass game to running backs either. But hopefully McCaffrey's at least able to get you up to double digits. And if you're a Christian McCaffrey owner, don't complain when he throws in like a weak week against the Bucks. You have Christian McCaffrey. He's the number 1 player in fantasy right now. So whatever, you can take these 2 weeks. You're getting them out of the way early in the season if it doesn't work out this week. And then you continue on with the rest of your life. McCaffrey missed practice. It was kind of referred to as a veteran's resting day. So I don't expect that to be an issue going forward. But yeah, it should work out just fine there. Let's see. On the Tampa Bay side of the ball, Carolina's defense is sort of the opposite, where they've been pretty good against the pass and they've been bad against the run. The 4th and 29th respectively in Football Outsiders DVOA metric. So we would like to be able to take advantage of them in the run game, but the issue is that the run situation has lived up to Bruce Arians' word, which he said preseason that it was going to be a hot hand approach, and he was not kidding. This past week, Ronald Jones got 9 carries, Peyton Barber got 8 carries, Dare Ogunbowale is getting worked in, not really in the run game, but as a pass blocker and a guy running routes out of the backfield. So this is a true committee. If I'm going to play anyone here, it's going to be Ronald Jones. I think that would be the correct move, just because he has looked better than Peyton Barber in recent weeks. Oh, the Patriots just scored. Sorry, I'm going to look at this real quick to see how they just scored. It's under review. Oh, little James White pass. I don't think he got in there. Anyway, this does not matter to you guys at all. I prefer Ronald Jones here. I think it's risky. I think they all have low floors. But in order, it would be Jones, Barber, and then Ogunbowale as a far, far third in this one. Now, in the past game, I mentioned O.J. Howard before. I don't think you need to play him. I think we've gotten enough sample size where it's not happening right now. And it's not worth taking these low scores every week on the off chance that it might happen, because there's been no indication that it might happen so far. So O.J. Howard, to me, you can find other better plays. I'll try and go through them, in this podcast as well as part 2. But I think Godwin and Evans are still both good plays. I know Evans has been disappointing outside of week 3 where he just went the fuck off, but this is kind of who Mike Evans is. He is a boom bust guy. He only has 5 fewer targets than Godwin on the season, and actually has about 75 more air yards than Godwin on the season. He's just going to be less consistent than him. So, he got shut down a little bit by James Bradbury during the week 2 matchup. I'm still going back to him. I'm still rolling him out here unless you really, really have, much better matchups, which it's probably unlikely. If you have specific questions, again, reach out to us. And then Godwin's wide receiver 1 right now. I don't think he's going to finish the season as wide receiver 1. But as of right now, he's an every week start. He's a guy that you can rely on. I think his touchdowns are going to kind of come back to earth as the season goes on. Who just got into the end zone for the fucking Patriots? Whatever. Anyway, Godwin's a guy that you can rely on. Evans, I think I'm still rolling out. And in this game, I will be taking Carolina. Oh, side note, Carolina defense. I like them a lot this week. I mentioned it on the recap podcast. The Bucs are missing the entire right side of their line, both their starting right guard, Alex Kappa, and their starting right tackle, DeMar Dotson. And I think this is an opportunity where Carolina is going to be able to get a lot of pressure on Jameis and force some turnovers. So Carolina defense, if you pick them up or if you're playing daily, whatever the situation may be, like them a lot this week. All right, let's move on to Cincinnati at Baltimore. Baltimore is an 11-point favorite. The over-under here is 48 points. On the Cincinnati side of the ball, I don't think you should be afraid of this Ravens defense. Marlon Humphrey has shut down some wide receivers, but in general, the Ravens defense has not been spectacular. They're not particularly towards the top of the league in DVOA. They've been giving up pretty big weeks to a lot of teams. So to me, I'm not even really shying away from Andy Dalton in this matchup. I mean, for context, I dropped him in a couple weeks to stream Kyle Allen because I think that's a slightly better matchup. But I think they're both very startable this week. I'm not afraid of this Baltimore defense. I don't think it's been particularly good. I think it's still coasting on this reputation that it had from last year. And with that, I think we don't really need to be afraid of the playing the pass catchers in this Bengals offense, specifically Tyler Boyd, who has 53 targets on the year. I know he might get shadowed by Marlon Humphrey, who's been very, very good, and he has also followed some receivers into the slot. He followed Juju into the slot a little bit last week. But 53 targets on the year, like you're not going to sit that kind of volume ever. And against the Ravens, the slot has been a little bit vulnerable. I know Humphrey wasn't entirely shadowing in there the entire time. So part of that is why. But this secondary is a little bit depleted. They're missing Tony Jefferson, their starting strong safety. They're missing Jimmy Smith, who's their other starting corner. And Earl Thomas hasn't looked particularly great this year. So I'm not concerned about Boyd. I think you can roll out Auden Tate, who has 22 targets over the last 3 weeks. Where I am a little bit concerned is with this running game. I know Joe Mixon had a nice week, 19 carries for over 90 yards last week, but he hasn't been on the field for more than 62% of snaps in any given week. He only has 16 targets on the year compared to 17 for Gio Bernard, who's been filling in on the rest of those snaps. So it's not ideal for Mixon in a game where they're an 11-point dog. How many times is Zach Taylor going to be able to just hand it off to him? How often is he going to be used in the pass game? If you need to roll him out, you need to roll him out, but I don't really advocate playing Mixon if you can avoid it. We also do need to talk about Tyler Eifert on the Cincinnati side of the ball. The Cardinals have been sort of this defense where you just play tight ends against them and it works out. And Eifert was the exception to that. It's because he set a season low in snaps last week with only 13 snaps. Bizarre choice by Zach Taylor, unless there is something else going on here that we don't really know about. But yeah, you can't play Tyler Eifert when he might be getting 13 fucking snaps. That's just not something that you can be doing. Maybe if it was a much better offense, but we're talking about a tight end on a bad offense who might get 25% of the team snaps. Like, absolutely not. So if you own him, drop him. Just don't play him. It's that simple. On the Baltimore side of the ball, it's shaping up to be a great week for them. Cincinnati's defense is absolutely terrible. They're 31st in overall DVOA by Football Outsiders. I know Lamar Jackson was a little bit disappointing this past week. He threw 3 interceptions. Great bounce back spot for him. You absolutely need to be playing him. And it's also a great spot for Mark Ingram because, like we said, this defense sucks. Like, they should be able to control the ball. They should be able to score at will. Ingram, I would project multiple touchdowns for him. Lamar, I would project multiple touchdowns for. I think this is just a great spot for everyone. I even think if you're really, really desperate for a flex, and I don't recommend it at all, but in a game that could and should turn into a blowout, like Gus Edwards might be able to come in and vulture a touchdown and be a sort of a desperation flex for you. Or maybe, when they're up big late, Edwards is the guy salting the game away. So don't hate that. The passing game is where things get a little bit interesting here because the 2 targets this year have been Marquise Brown and Mark Andrews. Now, Marquise Brown has not practiced yet this week. Early in the week, John Harbaugh said it was not a serious ankle injury, but the lack of practice seems to indicate something else there. So I don't really know what to expect. I'm going to be monitoring the news closely. I think if Marquise Brown does go, he's a fine play. If he doesn't, I guess Willie Snead would be the next man up, but Willie Snead hasn't really done much this year. Pretty much no one on this offense outside of the aforementioned Brown and Andrews have had anything more than, I think, 13 targets, and that's through 5 weeks. So that's a big deal. That's something we need to pay attention to. I think check back later in the week for takes on Brown and Snead based on the information that comes in. Regarding Mark Andrews, he is back at practice, and the guy hasn't had less than 7 targets in a game this year. He's a plug-and-play tight end 1 right now. I know he's been on the injury report every week. This is just too good of a matchup in a game where the rest of the pass game is a little bit banged up. Like, Mark Andrews should be an absolute go this week no matter what. I'm going to take Baltimore here, and then we will move on to our next game, Seattle at Cleveland. All right, so Seattle is a 1-point favorite on the road. The over-under here is 47.5. I'm a little torn on how I think this game is going to go because I think it really has the possibility to be a shootout. These are 2 defenses that are not particularly stout, and Seattle's offense has been, pretty stellar most of the year. And I think Cleveland's offense, despite how bad it's looked, has the chance to look a lot better this week if they see a little bit less pressure, which Seattle has not typically or really been able to provide so far. I think there's also the possibility that Seattle's just kind of able to set the tone for this one. So they might be able to do, what they want to, which is hand the ball off to Chris Carson a bunch, control the clock, and keep this low scoring, but win comfortably. So I think those are really the 2 likeliest outcomes. I'm not sure which I'm really preferring at this point, but I would think there's going to be at least a couple DFS lineups where I'm just sort of game stacking this game in anticipation that a shootout is possible. And I think I'll probably be game stacking it on the Baker side of things, in order to keep my ownership a little bit lower. But that's getting into a bit more DFS game theory. Let's talk about the game preview. On the Seattle side of the ball, I think Russell Wilson is, he's a matchup independent quarterback one at this point. The guy seems to be an exception to efficiency regression and touchdown rate regression. He's just a stud. He's really, really good. And even though he's likely going to be under some pressure this game, we know he can handle that. We know he can scramble around, extend the play, and find his guys, downfield that he needs to. Despite the talk of Rashard Penny coming back last week, Chris Carson stayed the obvious RB1. He looked great, and Cleveland just got absolutely destroyed by a Niners run game for 260 yards. So, I'm on Chris Carson this week, I think. I said before, I think one of the outcomes here is that Seattle's able to set the tone. This could just be a Carson game. This could be a game where he's just getting the ball constantly and being very efficient in the run game as well. Tyler Lockett, I think, is the other option who's just an absolute, stud and an absolute must play in this and every week. Very consistent in his targets, and Cleveland has been bad against the slot, so that kind of works out in your favor. And then the other options in this offense are Will Dissly, who has had 24 targets over the past 4 games. If you've listened to this podcast long enough, you know that when I'm looking for tight end starters, I'm looking for 6 targets a week. 24 divided by 4, that's 6. Will Dissly is an every week starter at this point for me. Maybe in matchups that are very, very bad against the tight end, I would look to sit him. But until further notice, Dissly has moved from streamer to starter. And then the other option here is DK Metcalf, who, he has more air yards than Tyler Lockett, but he's really sort of just a boom bust option every week. Cleveland should have their 2 starting cornerbacks, outside cornerbacks, that is, Denzel Ward and Greedy Williams backs this week. So that's a bit of a downgrade as well. And look, it's possible Metcalf gets a touchdown. It's possible he gets a couple deep catches. I even think it's likely he does those things. But you know what you're getting into here. You know that DK Metcalf isn't going to get you more than 6-7 targets in a game, and his floor is somewhere around 2 or 3. So you're getting into a situation where you've got a boom bust type of guy, and it might work out, it might not. Moving to the Cleveland side of the ball, I'm not entirely off Baker yet. I don't think he's a must start by any means, but I also don't think he's like a bad start. Seattle's front, as I said before, hasn't gotten a ton of pressure on the quarterback, and that's been Baker's biggest issue. It hasn't really been that he's been significantly worse when he's not under pressure. It's been that he's been under pressure a lot more. Just watching the game, you can see the guy, he looks like he hears footsteps even when the pressure's not here. So we'll see. We'll see if he's able to calm down. We'll see if they're able to scheme him into better situations. I haven't been impressed with Freddie Kitchens' play calling so far to deal with the weakened offensive line. It seems like he's acting like he still has last year's offensive line out here in the way that he's calling plays. But yeah, I don't think Baker's the worst start in the world. I think there's a chance this game shoots out. I think there's a chance he does pretty well in this. And with that, on that note, I suppose, I think Nick Chubb, Odell Beckham, and Jarvis Landry should all be started with confidence here. The Seahawks defense isn't anything to be scared about. They're a name recognition defense, similar to Baltimore right now. Nick Chubb is very good. He's being used in the pass game. Odell Beckham has only caught 4 of his 13 targets over the past 2 weeks. Like, that's obviously not going to continue. Odell Beckham's going to sit around a 60 to 70% catch rate at the end of the year, rather than this, 30% that he's at right now over the past 2 weeks. So that's pretty much bound to get better. And then Jarvis Landry has really just been consistent. He's getting at least 6 targets a week, and he's gotten up to 10 in some weeks. He's been consistent. He's a guy that you should be starting in this matchup. And you should really be starting most weeks in PPR. So keep that in mind. Call me a sucker. I'm taking the Cleveland upset. I think the dog pound gets what it's looking for here. All right, one more game, and then I'm going to take a quick break, guys. But Houston at Kansas City. Whoo boy. Kansas City is a 5-point favorite. The over-under is 55. At a macro level, play everybody. I'll break it down a little bit more than that. But when you're trying to decide who to play and who not to play, Remember that this game has an over-under of 55 and two of the best or most exciting and most fantasy-relevant quarterbacks in the league facing off against each other with two pretty mediocre defenses. It's not that hard. Sometimes fantasy is easy. Play everybody. There is a situation in which I think this game could get a little bit off the rails, and that's if the Texans really try and slow the game down and pound the ball with Carlos Hyde, which is why I recommend that you do play Carlos Hyde this week. I don't think this is maybe the likeliest scenario. I think likeliest scenario is shootout. But what teams have shown the past couple of weeks, the Lions and the Colts, is that you can kind of stick with the Chiefs a little bit by being aggressive, on fourth down play calls and running the ball a lot. So we saw Kerryon Johnson and Marlon Mack both have productive weeks. Kansas City's run defense is 30th in DVOA. Carlos Hyde is clearly the guy who's the number one running back in terms of getting the carries. And if they try and slow the game down, Carlos Hyde could go over 100 yards like no problem. Absolutely no problem. So, excuse me. Sorry, I'm still getting over illness a little bit despite, drinking and doing podcasting. But anyway, I don't think Duke Johnson is a good play. He hasn't gotten double-digit touches since week 1. So even though I like running backs, and you should be liking running backs against Kansas City, Duke doesn't really fit the profile there. I would keep him on the bench. In terms of the rest of the Texans, obviously Deshaun Watson is a play. We just saw him go for 40-some-odd points. We just saw Will Fuller put up the 9th best week for fantasy wide receiver ever. I don't expect that to continue, but he is a definite play this week against this not great pass defense. I really think Hopkins is the guy who's going to explode here. If you're a Hopkins owner, you're probably disappointed with what he's done so far. I saw in one of my leagues, the Hopkins owner traded him away today, and I was like, oh boy, that was the wrong time to do that, because I expect him to have a Fuller-like week this week and really just go nuts. I'm probably going to end up with 100% Hopkins in DFS this week. I don't care if he's high-owned. It's worth it to me. Hopkins is going to go absolutely nuts. Fuller is a definite play. I wouldn't be trusting either tight end because they split snaps. We don't really know where the touchdowns and targets are going to go. And, of course, that's Jordan Akins and Darren Fells. And then also, even with Kenny Stills not playing last week, Kiki QT was only in on 52% of snaps and still is expected to play this week. So I don't think you can play either of those guys. I think they both kind of eat up each other's fantasy production. But Watson, Hyde, Hopkins, Fuller, absolutely smash them in there, win your weeks. Kansas City side of the ball, Mahomes hasn't been Mahomes-like really the past 2 weeks, but this is a definite chance, if the Texans don't take the air out of the ball, this is a definite chance for him to get back to that. This Texans secondary is nothing to really worry about. In terms of their running backs, I would very much be on Damian Williams. He was clearly the lead back in his first game back with over 50% of snaps. Shady and Darrell Williams each saw somewhere between 25 and 30%, I believe. So Damian Williams, clearly the lead back, and Houston has been extremely vulnerable to running backs in the pass game. They're averaging giving up 9 catches and 67 receiving yards per game to the running back. So to me, that's a clear indication that Damian Williams should be the guy that you're looking at this week in the Kansas City backfield. In terms of the other pass catchers, it's looking like Tyreek Hill will not play. It's looking like Sammy Watkins is not going to play. Look, I'm just rolling everyone else out there. I mean, if I had to rank the wide receivers right now, I think it would be Robinson, Pringle, Hardman. But I'm rolling all of them. And obviously Travis Kelce. This might be the week that Travis Kelce goes for a couple touchdowns too. He hasn't really had that big breakout week yet this year. I think there's a decent chance it's this year or this week rather. We will see. But yeah, I like pretty much everyone on that Kansas City pass game. Not all of them are going to produce, but I think it's so difficult to discern which ones of them are, that unless you have significantly better plays or significantly higher floor plays, it's worth it to roll these guys because, a 100-yard 2-touchdown game is within the realm of possibility for all of these guys. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Let's Talk Fantasy Football.
You're listening to Let's Talk Fantasy Football, home of the brutally honest fantasy advice you've always needed.
Back with the rest of part one of the Week 6 preview here at Let's Talk Fantasy Football. It is still I was going to say your boy. It makes me sound like a dick. I don't know. It's your boy Walsh. Is that whatever. I'm just going to move on and pretend that never happened. We got 3 more games on part 1 of the preview, and then make sure you're keeping an eye out for part 2 coming at you tomorrow. We're going to start here with New Orleans at Jacksonville. Jacksonville is a 1-point favorite. The over-under is 44.5. We mentioned it in the recap podcast, but Jalen Ramsey seems unlikely to play, and this Jags defense isn't really anything to write home about anymore this year. So, it could be a worse matchup here for New Orleans. Let's talk about it a little bit because Teddy Bridgewater just had a very, very big week against this Tampa defense. I'm not really looking to play him here. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think you need to do it. I think there are better options out there. We've talked about a couple of them: Kyle Allen, Andy Dalton, etc. These are all guys who I'd be playing ahead of Teddy Bridgewater this week. Not going to really let that recency bias sneak up on me there. So that being said, I do think there are a couple pass targets that deserve consideration. I mean, the obvious one here is going to be Michael Thomas, who had 13 targets this past week, had a huge game. He's obviously an every week starter for you, but the other guy I think you can consider here is Jared Cook, because he's had 6 targets each of the past 2 games. I mentioned it before. That's my magic number for tight ends. I want 6 targets a game. And he got in the end zone last week. So I don't know if that's going to continue. I don't think he's as good of a play as Will Dissly is, but I don't think he's a bad play. And it's possible someone dropped him in your league after, getting frustrated with his play. It's possible that, you've had him on your bench and you've been rolling someone else. He's a guy you can consider this week. Do not consider Ted Ginn. He has 12 targets on the year. It's a very, very thin play. In the running game, the Jaguars have given up almost 6 yards per carry to running backs this year, though I think that stat's kind of skewed because half of those yards came to the Panthers last week. That being said, I think Kamara is absolutely a go. I think he's a very interesting DFS play. I'd be hard-pressed to really come up with a better running back play this week than Alvin Kamara. That'll do it for the New Orleans side of the ball. For Jacksonville, I think there's sort of a lot of guys that we need to talk about here. And we're going to start with everyone's favorite quarterback, Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew is a viable start this week. Out of the 2 quarterbacks in this game, he is the guy that I would rather be playing. New Orleans defense has been just okay. They've been better at home than on the road. I know that's a very small sample size. There's a lot of noise in that stat, but I'm not scared of New Orleans defense, and I don't think Gardner Minshew is either. He's also gotten at least 16 fantasy points every one of his starts so far. Minshew, I think, is a more than okay streamer, and he's a guy who's gonna have some value like going forward, I think, in this season. So not a bad guy to have on your team at this point. In terms of his pass catching targets, the number 1 guy this week, and this might be a bit of a surprise given how DJ Shark just went off, but I think D.D. Westbrook is the number 1 target this week. New Orleans has given up big games in the slot to Tyler Lockett, Chris Godwin, and Cooper Kupp. Now, I know D.D. Westbrook is not the caliber of player that those guys are, but the slot has sort of been where to attack them. As we've seen Marshawn Lattimore really come into his own over the past 2 weeks and really reemerge as that elite cornerback that he's been in past years. Speaking of Lattimore, he's shadowed Amari Cooper and Mike Evans the past 2 weeks and really, really locked them down, held Mike Evans to 0 catches on 3 targets this past week. I'm not sure that he's going to shadow DJ Shark because he did not shadow in the first 3 weeks of the season. So I don't know how they're going to feature him here, but I don't think it's a good enough reason to get off of Shark. I think Shark is still a good play and someone you should be playing this week, because there's a chance Lattimore's not following him around every single snap. But I do think it's a good enough reason to be on Westbrook ahead of Shark this week. In terms of targets, Westbrook is still slightly ahead of Shark on the season. So I even though Shark's been so good and so efficient and he's caught so many touchdowns, I think he's the number 2 wide receiver for this team this week. In terms of the tight ends, we just saw James O'Shaughnessy go out for the rest of the season with a torn ACL. I'm not saying pick up Jeff Swaim. I'm saying keep an eye on Jeff Swaim, see how many targets he's getting in this offense now that O'Shaughnessy is out, and then make decisions based off of that. And then at running back, Leonard Fournette has been an absolute stud the past 2 weeks after looking pretty bad but still getting a lot of usage the first 3 weeks. He's averaging 29 touches a game over the past 2 weeks. That's all you need to know. It doesn't matter if the matchup's good or not when someone's getting 25-plus touches every single week. I'm going to take Jacksonville here. I'm going to go with the Minshew Magic once more. Moving on to Philadelphia at Minnesota. Minnesota's a 4-point favorite at home here. The over-under is 44. And this is really a tough matchup for the Eagles against a good Vikings defense. They will not be getting Deshaun Jackson back yet. He seems like someone who, maybe this is just me being overly optimistic, but he seems like someone who can really unlock something in the Eagles offense and really provide a skill set that Mac Hollins has not been able to replicate in a good enough manner. So I'm excited for that Jackson return. I think right now I'm not really about playing Carson Wentz, and really the only guy that I think is like a definite must play on this Eagles team this week is Zach Ertz. The Vikings, while their defense is good, have not been terribly great against tight ends. They've been torn up by Darren Waller and Austin Hooper so far this year. So Ertz to me is an absolute play. I'm not attempting to play any of their wide receivers. I guess I would play Jeffrey for the touchdown equity if I need to, but not really looking for it. And then at running back, we've got an interesting situation where Darren Sproles is out here. So I think that makes Miles Sanders the preferred play. And I say that with like a question mark at the end of it, because I don't have a ton of confidence in this take, but I do think against this good Minnesota defense in a game where they're projected to be trailing, that Sanders should be benefiting from more of the pass work with Sproles out than Howard would, though they have been slightly willing to give Howard some targets. So, like I said, I think Howard – I didn't say that, but I think Howard has more touchdown equity. I think Sanders has more pass work equity. I think that generally gives Sanders a higher floor and maybe a bigger ceiling for Howard. But, I mean, Howard's been hot. Howard's been a guy to play these past couple weeks, and if you haven't been playing him, then you've been fucking up. So I can't blame you for making that play either. All right, sorry for that like half-assed, not taking a strong stance on either side take. But let's move to Minnesota. We saw the squeaky wheel narrative come true a little bit with Adam Thielen and Minnesota kind of throwing the ball a little bit more. I think it's possible they open it up again this week against this banged-up Philly secondary, because why the fuck would you try and beat them by running the ball at this point? Like, it's obvious how to beat this team right now. It's through the air. If Mike Zimmer can, take his head out of his ass then maybe they'll be able to do this. So I'm a little skeptical, but I think Cousins isn't the worst streamer. And I think Thielen and Cook are both comfortable starts. It seems like they've really made an effort to get Thielen involved in a way that they haven't with Diggs. And then Cook, I just said, they should open it up a little bit. But Cook's second on the team in targets. He has more targets than Stephon Diggs this year. So Cook is very involved in the pass game. If I were drafting today, I would be drafting him, probably as the third overall running back behind Saquon and McCaffrey. Dalvin Cook is an incredible player, an incredible start, and is being used in all facets of the game. I think the big question this week is whether Steph Diggs can break out in this matchup. I said it was a good matchup. Philly's given up 100-yard games to 5 different perimeter wide receivers so far this season. But both Thielen and Diggs are running the majority of their routes on the outside this year. I know both of these guys have spent significant time in the slot in years past. Thielen, particularly last year, was used heavily in the slot. They're both over 50%, and in Diggs' case, over 80% on the outside. So, look, Diggs is not someone that you can roll out there comfortably. You are going to be nervous playing him. But he has the upside of 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, and I think there's no doubt about that. I think it's much more likely that Thielen reaches that kind of ceiling than Diggs does. But if you've been waiting on Stephon Diggs, if he doesn't do it this week, I don't know when he's going to do it. So if you're trying to wait on him and make a decision maybe after this week on whether you can use him again or you can just cut bait with him or sell low or whatever you're trying to do, this is the week to do it. This is the week to roll him out here and see what he gives you. I'm going to take Minnesota in this one at home. And for the record, I don't think this is the Diggs breakout game. Sorry. All right. Last game of part 1. And then I'll let you guys go for the night. We're going to do Washington at Miami. What a fucking game. Washington 3.5-point favorites. The over-under here is 41. So we mentioned it on the recap. The big news in the Redskins camp is that Jay Gruden's out and Bill Callahan is the new interim head coach. Now, Bill Callahan says he thinks they should have been running the ball more. They are the favorite this week. So there's a couple plays here on the Redskins side of the ball that I think you can consider. I don't think you need to make any of them, but I think you should consider them. The first is Adrian Peterson, simply because for, the first and maybe the only time all year they are a favorite. Callahan says he wants to run the ball more. Peterson should have the touchdown upside there. I think you can consider him as an RB2 or as a flex. Not the worst play that you could make. The second here is Chris Thompson. Again, we'll see what Callahan does, but Chris Thompson has gotten at least 5 targets in every game. We know they like using him in the pass game. We know the Dolphins' defense sucks. Chris Thompson can break big plays. I think he's a completely fine play in a PPR league to get out there and see what happens. And then the last guy I would be considering here is Terry McLaurin. At least 7 targets in every game he's been healthy in. The Dolphins have gotten absolutely killed by the deep ball this year. To me, I think this is going to be a DFS play that I'm going to be looking at a lot is Terry McLaurin. I haven't really done too much diving into the prices or looked at public sentiment to sort of see how owned he's going to be. But Terry McLaurin feels like he's in a great spot this week. And I think if you're leaving him on your bench in season long, you're making a mistake. Now, going to the quarterback position, it seems like they're going to start Case Keenum this week, which is, again, another reason that I'm kind of more in on McLaurin. He's shown the most chemistry with Keenum to my eyes. I don't think Keenum is the worst play that you can make. This is the Dolphins' defense, and they're bad. That being said, you don't need to. And I'd rather be starting guys like Cousins, Minshew, Dalton, Kyle Allen, any of those guys. I would rather be starting ahead of Keenum. He's an unnecessary but not terrible play. And I think that's how I'd describe Josh Rosen too, because similar to Miami, this Washington pass defense is garbage. They're not getting a ton of pressure on the quarterback either, and we know Rosen doesn't do well under pressure, and this Miami offensive line also sucks. So I don't think it's the worst week for Rosen. Unnecessary, not terrible. Maybe if you're in a 2 QB league and you're getting a little desperate, that's the kind of play he is. In terms of his pass catchers, Preston Williams has been his favorite receiver. He's got 19 targets over the past 2 games. I'm going to go on record and say Preston Williams is a guy you should start if you can. Preston Williams is going to have a good game this week. He's going to have a fantasy usable game. In PPR leagues, if he does not get over 15 points, I will be very surprised. I would put some kind of money on that if someone else was on the podcast with me. Can't really do that, but I'm calling it now. Over 15 points for Preston Williams. I don't even think that's that big of that bold of a take. The other guy who you maybe should consider is Devontae Parker. He's sort of the more inconsistent deep threat type guy here. I definitely prefer Preston Williams to him, but I don't think Devontae Parker is the worst play. I don't envision a scenario in a regular league in which you would have to play him, so probably don't. And then at running back, if you're super desperate, and I will say I think both Peterson and Thompson are better plays than this guy. Kenyon Drake has gotten double-digit touches in 3 straight games, over 50% of the snaps every week. It's against a bad defense. I think this is like the 1 week of the year that you can play Kenyon Drake. Again, I'd rather be playing Peterson. Now that I think about it, maybe not Thompson. I don't know. This game's hard to diagnose. It's 2 really, really bad teams. But yeah, I'm gonna take Miami. Fuck it. Let's go Josh Rosen. Yeah, that's pretty much all I got here, guys. Give me one more sip here on my White Claw. That's gonna do it for me. Tomorrow, I will be coming back at you, maybe with a partner, maybe not. But I'm going to have 6 games. Looking at them now, they're almost all really good games. I'm really excited for this week. I think it's going to be a really fun week. I think it's going to be hopefully a very profitable week in fantasy. But I think it's going to be really fun. So I'm coming back at you guys. I will have part 2 of this podcast. It's going to break down 6 games, and I'll run through those now. It's going to be the Niners at the Rams, the Falcons at the Cardinals, Cowboys at the Jets, Titans at the Broncos. I'm hesitating because I wrote all these out in like their location names, and for some reason I'm saying the team nicknames, and I've had a couple of drinks and I'm like forgetting as I talk like which is which. Anyway, Pittsburgh at the Chargers, Detroit at Green Bay. Those are all the games that we're going to get through on the next podcast. So if you have any interest in those, make sure you're tuning in. If you missed the recap from this past week, it was me and Don. It was a lot of fun. We had a good time. Check that out if you need some information as well. But guys, I'll be back with you in about 24 hours. So for myself, for Let's Talk Fantasy Football, I am Walsh. Am I allowed to say for myself I am Walsh? Is that weird? I didn't do that right, did I? Anyway. I am Walsh. Later, podcast.
This has been Let's Talk Fantasy Football. Thanks for listening.